The fly fishing film tours got their start with a small group of dedicated fly anglers who wanted something new. They were tired of the old, boring fly fishing, old white guy thing, and the inspiration came from the skiing and skateboarding industry, and today has evolved into a new generation of films. Our guest today has been there since the beginning, and in this episode, you're going to get inspiration that is going to take your trip to the next level this season. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid and grew up around a little fly shop. R.A. Beattie, fly fishing producer, storyteller, and John Gierach fanatic, is going to share some of his biggest films, including The Silent Spotter, about a guide who is deaf and mute and has created a fishery for topwater permit action. We're going to talk about that today. Some of this with Tommy. We're also going to find out about his connection to Tom By's Clyde the Car, which we've talked about here on this podcast before, and also what keeps him going strong given changes in the industries. We get into a bunch of topics all over the place in this one. I think you're going to love it. Plus, we find out how he created a company that produces fully sustainable wood for guitars. Here we go. R.A. Beattie from OffTheGridStudios.com. How you doing, R.A.?
Doing so well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you for coming on here. I think I always go back to where the connection was made. I believe it was, I'm trying to think. I think it was Tim at Nautilus. He's got his own media stuff going on there, but I think he connected originally. I wasn't totally familiar with the work you've done. I've watched some videos since then, and I'm excited to share some of the amazing stuff you do. It seems like you're kind of out there covering multiple, topics and species and things like that. But we're going to get into some of these movies as we go here. But before that, take us back real quick on fly fishing. Were you a Colorado native, or how did you kind of get into this?
Yeah. I was born and raised in the mountains of Colorado, very rural, small little ranching valley, and not a lot to do growing up. And so we did a lot of hunting and fishing, and a river ran through the property. And so, yeah, a lot of fishing. Jumped into being a guide's apprentice, and, learned that people would actually pay us money to take them fishing, which seemed incredibly bizarre, but did that through high school and then through college. And so definitely cut my teeth, grinding it out every day of the summer, just as a fishing guide, which is, I feel like, a great way to come up and really just build those skill sets and spend that time in the water.
Nice. So you've got some guiding behind you, obviously. One of the movies that, maybe you could talk about this. We're going to get into some of the movies, but let's just kick it off with the Silent Spotter movie. I think that's more of a recent one. And, I thought that was really cool because, first off, where it is, kind of the that part of, I guess, Mexico, where you've got, just this amazing famous area, right? And then, but you had this, one of the guides, Tommy, was this deaf kid, essentially, who was a guide out there. To talk about that, how did that film come to be, and how do any of these films that you work on come to be?
Yeah. So, great question. When we are looking for a project, we're kind of looking for a couple of different things. And the first of which is, what is the fishing going to be like? What is our backdrop? What are the species we're going after? And is it viable? Is it interesting? But then really the next thing is, are we going to have a great story? Because really, when an audience gives us feedback, we really get two things. They say, we need fishing, like fish. Where are the fish? Where's the action? And they're really adamant about having pretty strong fishing action, because fly fishing media has come a long way and it's very, very good. And audiences have come to expect really high quality. So we have to really pay attention to that. But then we need a story. And so in this case, the fishing story is a location where, because of changes in the environmental conditions, they have found an opportunity to catch permit on floating crabs on the top. And so as an angler, you think, dry fly or surface feeding, any kind of surface fishing being the ultimate, being able to apply that to permit, like, that's a great story. Amazing. Let's do it. Yeah. Very visual. But permit eating dry flies is not really a story. It's not a deep story. So we try to look deeper and always understand, okay, what is the human connection? What is the human story here? And what fell in our lap is that one of the fishing guides that is really pioneering this type of fishing in this particular place, he happens to be born deaf and mute. And so immediately that raises a tremendous amount of questions as a filmmaker, or as a storyteller. And, like, so how does that work? How do you communicate with people, particularly in a type of fishing and fishery where communication is very, very quick and paramount? So we really, really were interested in that story, just of the mechanics and the logistics of how does a deaf fishing guide communicate. And so that's what kind of opened the door for us, and brought us into that space.
That's awesome. And how does that work? The video is great. I think it's about 20 minutes, a little under 20 minutes long. It's easy. Well, first off, let's just give a shout out real quick for people listening so they can go to offthegridstudios.com to check out these videos and they can kind of watch these.
Yeah, Off the Grid Studios is great in that you'll find all kinds of videos and more information.
Yeah. And I say I always catch myself. I say videos, right? I guess I use them interchangeably. Videos, movies. I always think of movies as, the movies, right? A 2-hour long movie. But really, I think, especially in the fly fishing, and maybe this is just worldwide, these shorter form movies. What do you call what you do? Do you call these movies?
Well, it depends on how technical and how nerdy you want to be. I mean, I would say we make fly fishing films, and then a lot of people would spin their heads and say, well, technically you're not shooting on film and you're not doing this and this and this and this. And I'd say, okay, well, technically you might be right.
Yeah.
But, technically a hamburger doesn't have any ham in it. So
Right.
we call things that aren't exactly what they are.
Gotcha. Doesn't really matter. It's kind of, that's not the important thing. The important thing is, like you're saying, what you make, right? Whether it's 20 minutes or 2 hours doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I'm happy with, videos, movies, films, any of that. They all represent the same idea, which is visual storytelling. And I think in this day and age, it's changing more and more and more what that means, because the way that media is shot, the duration, the orientation of it, everything's changing so fast. And the way that stories are told digitally is morphing and changing so fast that names are going to be harder and harder to pin down on things. But for all practical purposes, we're making videos, we're making movies. These are very, very short form in this instance because they're being created for like fishing film tours, where the typical length is between 12 and 20 minutes.
Yeah, 12 and 20. And why do you know the history? I'm not sure of your background. We could probably talk about that. The history of the fly fishing film tours, right? There's multiple. There's the one, I think, the fly fishing. There's also a new, I think we talked to the person, I think it's up a Canadian. It's more like it's another film tour, right? Talk about that. How did that film tour get started? And is that the only place you're making these for, or are there other places you're making these films?
Yeah, good question. So that's a long historied story. But to keep it really simple, going back to my roots. So when I was a fishing guide back in late high school, early college, technology just started to emerge, in the sense that you could get access to, some pretty affordable digital cameras. Granted, they're still shooting on tape. They weren't, like, they're not shooting to cards like they are today, like still shooting on tape.
Right. And what year was that?
So this was late 90s.
Late 90s. So this was like literally when the internet, right? If you think about it, right? The internet was kind of coming to be, I believe, right? In that period.
Yeah. I think the internet is just becoming a thing. Social media doesn't yet exist, which is crazy. And you have Apple comes out, and Apple does something revolutionary. They come out with a pretty affordable personal laptop or computer that has software on it that's called iMovie. And that gives you the tools all of a sudden to really start editing and making movies. And so you can buy a pretty affordable, Canon at this point in time is making pretty affordable digital cameras. You can hook it up to a laptop. They even have GarageBand, so you can start to make some music. And this is for, people that are being a little punk rock about it, that don't have budgets. This gives that young audience the ability to start making their own art, making their own movies. Now, granted that laptop that came out that we were cutting our first movies on probably had internal storage of like 20 gigabytes.
Right.
So if you think about, and the processing power, so if you think about the power in your phone, you could have one of the worst smartphones on the market right now, and I guarantee you it's 20 times stronger, more powerful than what we were editing with it back then. So anyway, you've got a bunch of young fishing fanatics back then, and they are all kind of seeing this trend where all of the popular media in fly fishing does not represent who they are. The sport is old. It's kept very close to the chest. There's not a lot of information sharing.
Yeah. It's the old white guy fly fisherman, right? That uppity, boring, kind of rich thing, right? That's what it was.
100%. And so we didn't see ourselves represented there. We're also a lot of young people coming from mountain towns where we are seeing surfing and skateboard and snowboarding and skiing. And we're seeing that media and we're saying, well, how come it's happening here? And it's fun and it's exciting, but it's not happening in the sport that we like, which is fly. Because fly doesn't have to be stuffy and it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It can be travel and lifestyle and fun and entertaining. So anyway, we start making content reminiscent of the other sports that we're seeing in the space, lifestyle based, storytelling based. And we're not the only ones with this idea. There's 4 or 5 different people doing that. But you got to remember, there's no internet, or if there's internet, there's no place to show these. There's no YouTube. There's no social media.
Oh, right. Not even YouTube. YouTube's not even there yet.
Yeah, nothing's there. And so what do you do? So we were like burning stuff on DVDs and like sending it around to people and, hosting parties, like hosting college parties, and having a kegger and like showing a movie on a screen. And so it's very punk rock. It's like underground. So we did that for a while. It happened long enough where there's a gentleman. He's not a gentleman, but he's a good friend of mine. And his name is Tom Bai. And so he runs the Drake magazine. And so he came from Powder magazine. And what Powder used to do was a video awards where they would take kind of all the best video of the year and have an event and showcase little pieces of it and give some awards and have a party. And it was basically an excuse to have a party and get the community together. So Tom applies that idea to what is called the 5 minutes of fly fishing. And he hosts that at the trade show that used to be in Denver. This is probably 2005. And so I remember when he had the first one, the whole industry shows up. They have no idea what to expect. And for an hour, everybody's, drinking beer and having fun. And we're watching these crazy fly fishing films that are each 5 minutes long. And no one's ever seen anything like this.
And what was this called? What was this called that Tom did?
It's called the Drake Magazine 5 Minutes of Fly Fishing.
Okay, yeah, the 5 minutes of fly fishing. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it goes crazy. I mean, you would have thought that like we had invented a new color. Like people were going crazy and they were, and it was a giant party and it was like wildfire. And all of a sudden brands got it and they were like, how do we do that? Like, okay, we don't really even know what this is, but we need in on this. And so all of a sudden we have brands turning to us and they're like, hey, we're going to give you money to go do this. And we're like, wait, you're going to pay us to do Wayne's World? Like we're
nice.
Like, what are you talking about? We're not, this isn't even what we do for a living. We're just screwing around.
And at this time, are you a guide? Is that what you're all your efforts as a guide, and you're not doing much, and you're doing all the video still. You're getting into it.
Yeah, and I'm a college kid too, and I'm a fishing guide.
Yeah,
and so we're screwing around on the weekends and filming stuff, and just being bums, and so we did that for a while, and then what emerges there is a group of a little bit older folks, and they were called the Angling Exploration Group, and AEG was their calling card. And so they decided we're going to go out on the road and we're going to produce, some more long form content. And so they start coming out. They go to Patagonia. They go to, gosh, I don't know. Their shtick was we're going to get in a van and drive and live in a van for a month and fish, and we're going to do the Trout Bum Diaries.
And is that who this is? Is that what we're talking? Is this the Trout Bum Diaries?
Yeah, guys? Yeah. And then, the old guard's like, well, the Trout Bum Diaries has been done before. John Gierak wrote that, and I can't believe you're copying him. And it's like,
oh, wow.
Right? Because like everything repeats itself.
Right.
And so anyway, they create all this content. They're selling DVDs. They're kicking butt, and they look at what Tom Bai does, and they go, that's cool. And people like these festival things. So we should start like a film tour. So they started a film tour, and that was the very first one was called the Fly Fishing Film Tour. And so they would have a call for entries. We would submit a film, and you got to remember, there's like 5 or 6 people doing it back then.
Yeah.
And so we would submit a movie every year. And so we put movies in the Fly Fishing Film Tour for, call it 20 years.
Starting in that time, the 05s, 06 in that range.
Yeah. And so basically what you'd do is you'd make a 5-minute piece every year, and you'd give that to Tom Bai for the Fly Fishing Awards, and you'd make like a funny little piece, and then you'd make a little bit longer form piece for the film tour. That happened for a very long time, and that was kind of the gist of it. And then it became more and more popular and grew and grew and grew. In the beginning, I mean, I remember driving to a premiere at Patagonia, and it was like 20 dudes sitting on the break room tables looking at something on a screen. Like this was not glamorous. But now, and then now fast forward to where I live in Bend, Oregon, We've had shows here where our massive, 800 person theater, the Tower
Wow.
here, will sell it out 4 nights or 3 nights in a row.
That's cool.
And to answer your initial question, there have been other festivals that have grown out of this. So there's the International Fly Fishing Film Tour, which is a great film tour. It's very different than
Yep.
the Fly Fishing Film Tour. So our film Silent Spotter actually plays in the International Fly Fishing Film Tour. And then we have another film, The Hard Way, that's playing in the Fly Fishing Film Tour. But yeah, they are the core festivals, if you will.
Those are the two. The Fly Fishing Film Tour, kind of the F3T, was the original, and there's also now the international, the IF4, right? Those are kind of the two.
Yeah, and the IF4 is a little bit more artsy and has a little bit, I'd say a little bit more emphasis on storytelling, and it's just a little bit different genre of the genre. And then the IF4 is like a little bit more high energy punk rock.
God, it's so good. I love it. And I love it. We were off air starting to talk about the Apple and Steve Jobs. I love it because I love that story about products. And what we're talking about here is that, the iPhone wasn't the first cell phone ever,
Yeah.
right? But they came in and perfected it, right, at that time. And I think the same thing with the film tour. F3T, I remember, that's going strong. But then IF4 comes, like, well, this is kind of the same thing, but right. But no, it's different. And they're doing different things. So it's really cool. And I love that you talked about Tom Bye because we love Tom, but the storytelling is so obviously, is so critical and all this. And he told this crazy story on the last podcast. I've talked about this a couple times, but it was this story about this synthetic marijuana thing, right? Where people were going to prison and and it was connected to a lodge and it was all this crazy stuff. And I actually ended up getting some crazy emails from it. And, and there was like multi-million dollar, I think Tom got sued for whatever it was, $1 billion, some crazy number. Right. And so I feel like it's like those are the stories that are really interesting. But Tom was at the beginning, right? So I didn't realize. I always forget that. So he was at the beginning of these movies. Like he was the guy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, it's funny how old we're getting and how fast time moves. But it's funny how quickly our public consciousness forgets because I just saw Tom, and I just saw him a couple days ago. I was at the fly fishing show in Denver, and he and I are hanging out. And we were talking because one of the funny outgrowths and one of the funny stories is I had this. So every year I told you we'd have to make a short 5-minute piece for his entry, and it'd be funny. Comedy was the way to do it because if you have 5 minutes, people don't want to come in there and see you posture and be cool and tough. They just want to go in and laugh. And so we would make funny little pieces that were goofy, and we'd make fun of the fly fishing industry.
Yeah.
And so I called Tom and I said, Tom, because I'm still a guide at this point, I don't have any money, and I'm like, hey Tom, I've got this idea. I want to do this really funny film about gangsters picking up like high-end clients because I'm working in Aspen and I'm working for a really high-end clientele. And like we get in trouble if there's like a coffee cup in our car. Like, so I'm like, what if it wasn't me showing up to pick up a client? Like, what if it was someone who's like, what if you had like a gangster show up? Like what would it would blow their mind, right? So we came up with this film called When Guiding Goes Gangster, but we needed a gangster car. And so I called up Tom and I'm like, hey man, I found this horrible, awesome old car. It's a Mercury Marquis. This thing's from the 70s. It's like this big pimp ride.
Yep.
I'm like, I have enough money to buy half of it. I'm like, can you buy the other half of it? And he's like, oh, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, come on, this will be great. And we'll shoot this thing. And he's like, okay, whatever. So he buys this car with me. We shoot this really kind of funny little piece. And Tom stars in it, by the way, which he does a great job. And then we get done with the shoot. And I'm like, well, see you later. And he's like, what are we going to do with this car that we own? I'm like, oh, well, like, I don't know, man. Like, we'll figure something out. And so Tom comes up with this idea. And he's like, let's put it on the road. And we're going to give it to people and they can take it on a trip and then they can write a story and they can hand it off to somebody else.
Yep.
And we'll call it Clyde. And so that's Ride with Clyde, which has been part of the Drake magazine for like, I don't know, 15 years or
that's
10,
right.
12.
Yeah. Clyde.
So it's funny because so little goofy screw around projects like that, grow into other weird things,
Check out Jackson Hole Fly Company today. Premium fly gear straight to your door without the premium price. Jackson Hole Fly Company designs and builds their own fly rods, reels, flies, and gear, delivering quality you can trust at prices that let you fish more and spend less. Whether you're picking up a fly rod for the first time or guiding every day, they've got what you need. Check them out right now. That's JacksonHoleFlyCompany.com. JacksonHoleFlyCompany.com. Let On DeMark Lodge give you the Montana fly fishing experience you deserve. The gin clear waters of the Missouri River offer a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, their family of guides will tailor a trip just for you. You can head over to ondemarklodge.com to fish one of the great trout streams in the country. Well, and I'm thinking back now, the podcast, that was the great thing. The Drake had their own podcast for a while, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the person that produced that.
Elliot.
But, Elliot. Yeah, Elliot. We had him on the podcast a while back, and he talked about the Clyde, right? I think he was driving that for a while, telling stories through it and all that. And I always thought, I remember seeing that. That's why it's so good, this stuff. That's why using some, again, I talk about John Gierach a lot, but some of these great writers where they explain, like, how do you become a great writer? And instead of, you don't, basically tell somebody about something, you show them, like, right? You show them through things. And this story they told about, somebody wants to show, like, I'm going to point a gun at you. And instead of just saying you're pointing your finger, you say the finger was so bent that when he pulled the trigger, it shot the person in the foot. Right. You know what I mean? Talking about how bent the guy's finger was, mangled.
Totally.
And so you're getting that picture. And I feel like Clyde is the same thing, right? I remember when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, what is Clyde? That's really bizarre. That must be Elliot must be way out there, right? But so that's it. So again, it wasn't about Elliot. This was about Tom and these stories you guys were telling through Clyde.
Well, I think that's kind of the little fascinating thread through all of it is that, there's fishing, and just like anything, it probably doesn't matter if you're into biking or skiing or whatever it is. There's really deep, interesting, quirky, cool stories and amazing thing that happen, and those stories aren't always in line or jive with popular media and commercialism and commercial media, because they don't they don't fit that narrative. Like, an industry is trying to sell products and do things, and they have a structured way of doing that, but all this fringe weird stuff is so cool, but how do you harness it, and where does it go, and how do you access it? And I think Tom did an amazing job very early on of looking at fly fishing and saying, there's this really weird, cool culture, and it's small, but how do we tap into it, and how do we give that a voice? And I think that's what the Drake.
Yeah. And you think the small is the fly fishing industry, or just the people that they're into those movies and that stuff?
Well, honestly, the fly fishing industry, I don't know how big it is now. I know that, like, there was a story back in the day that one of the bass fishing manufacturers made it, like, out of their entire catalog of stuff, they had a bunch of rubber worms, and one of the rubber worms was a root beer color, and the sales of just that root beer color was bigger than the fly industry.
Oh, wow.
So the fly industry comparatively is really, really small. But I think even within that, there's just, there's a lot of weirdos and there's a lot of funny folks. And so Tom did a really good job of, like, being the voice or capturing a lot of that.
Yeah, he did.
There's space for that.
That's so good. Well, this is awesome. I think we're getting off to a good start here because, I love, again, talking about people that are doing good stuff out there. But let's take it back to Tommy real quick. We mentioned, the communicating, and I'm really interested in that because I haven't done, much of that, that whole, I watched the other movie you had, I think. What's the other one that just the newer one you have out there?
The Hard Way, which is about a Native American fishing guide, Matt Mendez, on the Deschutes River.
Exactly. And so I'm more familiar. That's more my backyard, and I understand that. But, kind of the X-flats and all that stuff was something I wasn't as familiar with. But this is really interesting about Tommy because he's deaf, mute. So how does he? So you're on the boat. How does he communicate? What is that like when you're fishing and all of a sudden, you're trying to find permit out there?
Yeah, good question. His communication is, so he taught himself sign language. And I've learned a lot over, since we started this project, but basically, there's different variations of sign language. And he taught himself his own, and it's oddly intuitive. And you have to watch him communicate with you, but the way that he moves his hands and the way that he represents, like, a permit or a permit eating something, or all the different visuals he'll do with his hands, they're really intuitive. And you kind of can figure it out pretty quick, which only, I guess just it speaks to his ability to communicate just with anybody. But he does have to get your attention, and he does have to be able to, for anyone who's been on the bow of a boat, a guide sees a fish, they have to tell you where it is. And that's,
Hmm.
for me, I've always had a hard time. They say, oh, it's at 11 o'clock and it's 70 feet and it's there. Do you see it? And you're like, I don't have any idea what you're pointing at.
Hmm.
And, and so
Yeah.
he has to get you there. He initiates a lot of getting your attention by making just kind of just a real kind of deep guttural noise. And so it kind of just makes this kind of like this kind of deep, kind of like chirp. And if he initiates that, it's pretty, you'll hear it, and then you just turn to him, and he'll be pointing, and he might help and grab your rod and kind of point your rod and do that sort of thing. But, he's going to make a noise like that. He might just take his finger too and poke you in the shoulder
Yeah.
if he needs your attention. He's going to, if he needs to, he'll pull out, sometimes he'll pull his arm out and put it in front of you. So you can see like the inside of his arm, and he'll write like letters in, invisible letters, on his arm. He can pull out his phone and he can text you stuff. He can, but a lot of it's just kind of intuitive, kind of sign language. If his dad is guiding on the back, so he's standing on the front of the bow, his dad's on the back. If his dad is trying to get Tommy's attention, he's going to do stuff like take that massive push pull and bring it all the way up in the front and wave it in front of his line of sight. Try to get something in front of him visually so he can get his attention, and then he can look back. He'll sometimes stomp on something or make a noise. His dad will, because, he can feel the vibrations.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think what was really hard capturing it is that it's all very nuanced and subtle, and it happened very quickly. And it's not it's not flamboyant. There's not a lot of arms waving around. Like, it's very subtle and nuanced.
And I think part of that what I thought about was, the seeing, right? The seeing of the fish, that's not an easy thing to do, and he's good at it. Is there something to that where he's lost some of those other senses, but now he's the greatest? He can see better than anybody else, see these fish.
Yeah, I think he definitely has. He has amazing eyes, But I think even further, maybe it's because, and I noticed this, I was with him last week. We took the film back to Ishkalak last week and showed it for him and the entire community. And so I spent some time on the boat with him. I spent time on the boat without cameras and distractions. But I think what I noticed is that, like, when I'm on the bow, I'm hearing skipping mullet behind me, or, a bird crash into the water. I'm looking over here. I'm like, I think our ability to concentrate is always fleeting, and there's a lot of distractions, and he's hyper focused. He doesn't have a lot of distraction. And so I think that just puts him in the moment a lot more.
Yep. That makes total sense. What about on your movie? So this one, I think, was about under 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, this was, the name of it was Silent Spotter. And for, I guess people can watch, is that going to be out there on one of these film tours?
Yeah. So that's touring right now with the International Fly Fishing Film Tour, the IF4. I think it's doing about 250 cities right now.
Okay. So it's out there, so they can easily find that by going to your website.
Yeah. And then we'll release that film digitally here later in the year.
Oh, you will? Will you release that digitally in your past films? Are they out there like free to the public, or is that something you purchase? How does that work?
Yeah, YouTube. We put everything on YouTube.
Nice.
So we have an Off the Grid Studios YouTube, and you can watch all of our old stuff is on there. And all the upcoming new stuff will be there. So that's a great place to catch stuff. But yeah, we'll put it there. Yeah, the days of selling films are long gone.
Oh, really? So those days, did those end a while ago?
Yeah, we used to sell a lot of DVDs. It's pretty funny. Probably going back to like 2008. I had someone call me, and they were like, I think it was like a German distributor, and he's like, "We would like to carry your films and be your distribution partner in Europe. Do you have a distribution partner in Europe?" I'm like, "Dude, we don't have anything to sell." Like, yeah, like, okay, like, you could be our distribution partner. Now what do we do?
Right.
And so we sold a ton of DVDs for a long time. And then one morning we woke up, and I think that was probably 10 years ago, and it was almost like the stock market had crashed. Like, everyone was like, "We're not buying DVDs. We're shutting our companies down." And
yeah, it's changed. It's amazing because it's always changing, right? I mean, like, and you can look at movies.
Yeah.
You can look at, music, right? That's changed. You
Yeah.
had the DV, same thing. You had those, and now digital, and then it was like now you can go to Spotify and literally get almost every song on there, right? It seems like.
Yeah, and the Spotify thing is such a wild beast. I mean, I work in music too, and Spotify is such an amazing and cruel animal because, like, basically these artists are handcuffed to it because if they want a shot at being in a big festival, if they want distribution, if they want all these things, like they have to use Spotify because Spotify dictates a lot of, who's going to show up at major festivals and who's going to be headline these different things. Well, Spotify's dictating a lot of that.
Really, not Apple, because they have their own music. There's other, right, but not Apple's
Yeah.
not leading there.
Probably depends on the specific venue and the tour, but like for most of these artists, like if you want to make it, you need to play the Spotify game, and I think that's super dangerous. But
Yeah,
anyway, that's a different
yeah, it's
different
different.
conversation.
Well, let's take it back. So, Ishkalak, talk about that now. Do you have a connection? Do you have a lodge? Is that something you've been connected to down there?
Yeah, so the way that this whole thing came to be is that there's a lodge owner, and his name is Jesse, and he owns a lodge called the X Flats. And this is in Ixcalac, which is in southern Mexico, southern part of the Yucatan, a couple miles north of the Belize border,
Yeah.
an end of the road kind of small fishing town. And he has a fishing lodge. And so Jesse has been running that really, really well for a long time, done a great job. Tommy's one of the guys that works there.
Mm.
And so I ran into Jesse in the airport in Cancun, coming back from a different filming gig. And we didn't really know each other, but we recognized each other. And he's like, "Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. I've got this great story." That's when he initially kind of pitched me on this story, but he pitched me on the floating crab permit thing. And I was like, "Well, that's interesting. Let me dig. Like, let's dig in a little bit. Like, let's see if there's a real story here." And lo and behold, we figured out the Tommy story, but it took a little while to get there.
Gotcha. And the floating crab, is that something you've done a little research, I'm sure, on this? Is that something where at the time there was no other place people were fishing with floating crabs?
There's been people catching fish on floating crabs for a while, and it's and different places and in different ways, but it's definitely been more of like whispers, and you haven't really seen it be like a mainstream thing. I haven't seen it where everybody opens up their fly box and they have floating crabs. But what's funny is like crabs, for folks that have spent a lot of time walking the flats or hanging out in that kind of water, like you see a lot of floating crabs like on the surface and they dive down. Like permit, people fish with live crabs, like floating live crabs for permit. Like they eat stuff off the top. And so I think these scenarios where it's happening with such frequency that they can target them is relatively new. And a lot of that has to do with like these flows of like this sargassum, this really obnoxious floating weeds that are coming in and inundating the flats in a lot of tropical places. Like this floating grass is bringing in these crustaceans and really kind of transforming the viability of topwater permit fishing for some of these places.
Oh, right. So these invasive weeds are actually making it better for fishing on the surface for permit.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting because initially, like when you watch our movie, we have a lot of drone footage that shows the extent of this floating weed, and it's substantial. And it's prevalent enough where you could see it being a pretty substantial issue, just in terms of spotting fish, finding fish, and also fighting fish. Because, trying to sort
Right.
through all this vegetation and find a fish could be really, really hard. And so if they weren't capitalizing on eating crabs out of it, it could actually shut down some of these fisheries or make them really, really challenging.
Gotcha. Well, let's kind of take this more bigger picture here, the bigger view, and talk more on some of your other films. And you mentioned the 5-minute film, the early ones with Tom, 20-minute, and I'm not sure how long of films you've done, but does that change? How does that change your process or the film when you're doing something 5 versus 20 versus something maybe more longer?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think what we're always trying to do is create the shortest film. The tightest edit we can create is kind of our goal because we like creating really tight, cohesive stories, and we don't really like wasting frames. We don't like wasting time.
Yeah.
The tighter the narrative for us, the better. It's almost like with writing. We don't waste a lot of words and we don't have a lot of filler.
How do you know when you've gone through that process? I'm not sure how long that takes, but how do you know when the thing is ready, when it's done?
Good question. So they're all a little different. This one, so the Silent Spotter one was really tricky because we had to we had to tell a story about someone who can't speak and can't tell their own story. And so inherently that caused a lot of issues from a narrative and structural standpoint. Like, how do you do that? So if Tommy can't tell his own story, then who should tell his story? Are you going to have his dad tell it in Spanish and you're going to subtitle the entire thing? There's not a lot of options. And so we looked at it and we said, okay, Jesse from The Lodge Owner, he has really good banter, and he kind of has that Ryan Reynolds kind of quick, fun, fast.
Yeah, he does. That was the thing you pick up on that movie. Jesse was, like you just resonate with from the very start of that, the quick little,
Yeah.
That comedy was just perfect. You know what I mean? Like it just flowed really nicely.
Yeah, he has a very quick wit and fun kind of banter. And so we talked about it as a team. We said, Jesse could narrate this, but then it begs the question, if you want to be honest, like what gives this, white gringo from the Rockies, what gives him the right to tell this story? He's an outsider coming in, and we ask that question all the time.
And you asked it. That's a great thing. You actually asked it right at the start of the movie.
Yeah.
You basically said, "Why does this guy have the right to come in here into these native lands and tell that story?"
Well, because we see it all the time, and we've been guilty of it ourselves. Look, I'm not saying we haven't ever done this, but you see it all the time. People show up, they show up in a new place with cameras, and they kind of act like they're like Columbus showing up on some foreign land. They're like, look at this beautiful place that we found and we discovered all on our own, and we're going to tell the story about it. And you're like, wait, people live there. Like, you didn't discover this. You just showed up today. So we didn't want to be those people. And so we had to really, and so the quickest way to cut that conversation out and to just kill it is to address it right out of the gate. So we come in and say, like, why am I telling you this story? Because why isn't Tommy telling you the story? Because he can't speak. And so Jesse does a really good job of telling all the different aspects of the story, but then also being, very witty and fun and playful, and acknowledging when he's, being self-deprecating and poking fun at himself, and, acknowledging when he's being ridiculous. And that gives it a little bit of levity and allows the story to unfold in a way where it needs to be fun.
Yeah.
And it needs to be light, and it needs to be entertaining. And so Jesse allows that to happen.
Yeah, he does. I think that's why it sets you at ease right away. This isn't going to be like, oh, hardcore fishing. Like I'm the greatest permit. I'm so crazy at permit. It's like, it's funny that's important. What I mean? Because I think you hear these permit stories about how addicted people are, and sometimes it's over the top, and I feel like, I think you did a good job of bringing it together. So go back to the length. So what is the longest film you've ever produced?
The longest stuff that we produced would probably be around the 30-minute mark. We haven't gotten too far down the runway after that. I think we do a lot of, because we've done a lot of TV, and a lot of that kind of stuff too. So I don't know. I feel really good in that 20 to 30 minute space. It feels comfortable.
It does. Okay.
It doesn't seem too exhausting, because I don't know. I have a very short attention span. If I was a writer, I'd be writing short stories.
Sure. I always go back. I love, going back to the river runs through it. And because you were kind of there probably, right? The early, you were talking about late 90s, but this was like mid 90s. We kind of joke, right? The greatest fly fishing movie of all time sort of thing. But that was like one of a kind, right? There's nothing else really out there like that movie. Everything else is shorter. What's your take on A River Runs Through It? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, A River Runs Through It. I was such a fanatic, crazy fish bum when I was younger, just to like an unhealthy level. And to see, fishing didn't exist in mainstream media, and like nobody understood it. No one got it. And like,
yeah,
I was the only kid in my school who fished. Like, no, everyone thought I was like the weird fishing kid.
It fished or fly fished?
Fly fished.
Yeah.
And so when A River Runs Through It came out, it was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like someone's capturing kind of the essence of this whole thing. And the story itself is just phenomenal. And it's got Brad Pitt in it. I mean, so why not? Love it. That was also, I was a fishing guy during that time. And that's also when that was the boom. And that's when it went from, you'd have a trip every now and then to, you're booking like 2 trips a day in Colorado, because you've got people showing up out of the woodworks in every mountain town. And everyone's like, I'm going to try this fly fishing thing. Like, I saw Brad Pitt doing it. We're trying it today.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful, I mean, that piece still holds so well.
Yeah, it does.
It's so beautiful. And it all comes back to the writing.
Yeah, it's the writing. What's your process like on that? Do you write out your entire movie? Is it scripted? How do you do that? Because you're not dealing with real, right, actors necessarily. These are people.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, we've learned a lot. Back in the day, we do a lot of run and gun stuff. I'd call it more like Donzo journalism, where you just grab a camera and grab a plane ticket and you take off and see what you get. And you can do that. That's a viable way to do things, but it's not a very smart way to do it. And so the way that we look at it is we do a lot of pre-production, we do a lot of research, and we know that there's the film that you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit. And those are three different animals. And so we've got an amazing writer that we worked with on these last two films, Miles and Nolte. And so Miles he's been writing and fishing and hunting for a very long time, and he's very good. And so we take a location and a place and we start doing research, and we start calling people and we start interviewing, and we will write out a full treatment and we will have a full idea of what we're going to do. And then you get there and everything goes upside down and nature screws you and you throw everything out the window and you shoot what you shoot.
You shoot what you shoot, right? Because it's fishing, right? That's the great thing. You never know what's going to happen.
It's the hardest thing to film. I mean, I'm so jealous of these other action sports folks. I tell my friends in like ski and, snowboard or whatever, I'm like, so is it nice being able to like set your camera up and you have a cup of coffee and then you just get on the radio and say, go? Like, what's that feel like? Because it's never easy. It's never what you want it to be. But anyway, you do it, you capture it all. Then you got to come back. And so what we'll do is we'll start laying everything out. And so this film, we lay everything out and it's 30 minutes long. And we say, okay, we need to cut 15 minutes out of this thing. So we got to cut this in half and we got to kill a bunch of stuff that we love. And we got to start chopping. And so we did 17 revisions of this edit. And that really comes down to Miles writing, looking, and saying, okay, we asked this question is asked here, but it's not answered here. And this needs to be changed structurally. And then we show it to a lot of people. I think we probably showed it to 20 or 30 people.
Just give them it and say, what's your take on it?
Yep. And, Tom Bai was hilarious because Tom Bai watched it. And he's brutal because I've known him for so long. I've known him for so long since I was like
right. What was his initial take? Do you remember some of it?
He's like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, I watched the film, and I'm like, well, I can tell that from your the hostility in your voice that you don't love it. And he's like, no, I mean it's okay. And I'm like, well, do you love it or you hate it? And he's like, neither. I was like, okay, well, that doesn't help at all. Like, so what's wrong? He's like, well, you're telling too much and it's too much and it's still too much and you just got to cut it all down. It's like, okay.
Like you're going into too much detail on stuff.
It's actually, it's kind of funny because it's like the process is kind of like that scene actually in A River Runs Through It where there's that writing scene in the beginning, which I love, where the kids are writing and doing homework or writing. Oh, yeah. Rather. Yep. And I think it's Norman, right? Norman writes this thing and brings it to his dad's desk and he reads it and he hands it back and he's like, cool, half as long. Yeah. And he takes it back and like writes it in half as long and he hands it to him. He's like, half as long. He brings it back and he's like, good, and throws it away. That's kind of how a lot of people are that are watching your stuff, which is good because that's what you need. You need really strong feedback.
Stay warm, stay focused, and don't let the cold dictate quitting time with Heated Core's advanced base layer technology. Hydro Wick fabric wicks away moisture while undetectable carbon fiber heating elements target key areas to keep you dry and warm all day long. I had a troubling experience fishing a New York steelhead stream while in December. I was fishing it and my feet, my legs, I was getting cold. I literally felt like things were freezing. I had to step out of the water. And I literally had to stop fishing, and then I watched somebody else take that steelhead. So never again for me. I'm sticking with Heated Core. Lightweight and unrestricting, you can stay on the water all day with 3 levels of heat and a rechargeable 7.4 lithium-ion battery. Heated Core may just be your ticket to more time on the water this season. So you guys have done a few things out there. Now, you've been out there doing this a while. What's that look like as far as your catalog? How many, do you keep track of that? How many movies? Which one has been the most resonated with your audience the most, that sort of stuff?
We've done a lot of stuff. I mean, I think we've probably done 30 films about, this length for different film tours and a lot, I mean, more short films than I can count. And there's definitely some favorites in there. I mean, honestly, like I did a piece and I got to incorporate John Gierak, and he was a hero of mine. Just growing up reading the Trout Bomb Diaries and,
Oh
and,
yeah.
and, and loving, Gierak. And so that film was called The Arctic, and it's super old. It's probably 14 or 15 years, but I still really like that piece. Um, but we've done a lot of just all kinds of weird stuff. We've done, conservation pieces and fish porn kind of pieces, and we've done some horrible stuff too. I mean, some of the stuff I look at, I'm like, this is just terrible. But that's how you learn, right?
Is that stuff still out there? Is the horrible stuff still? Can people find that on YouTube out there?
Oh yeah, everything's on our YouTube, and you can find the
Nice.
the good, the bad, and the ugly. I don't care. I just put it all out there. But that's part of the artistic process, right? If you're going to learn how to do this on your own, you can't be scared to make garbage. You have to just go do it.
Yeah, you got to put in the reps, right? You got to just keep. You're going to have something that's going to be great and something that maybe isn't as great, but you got to just keep putting the reps in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's terrifying, and you get beat up a little bit, and people give you just horrible feedback. Actually, the internet's getting nicer.
Oh, you do. It's getting nicer. Well,
I don't know.
like
What do you think?
it's a good question because I always feel like, you're not even there yet until you get your first 1-star review when I talk about podcasting. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like because that really is a time where, if you're getting all great, it's
yeah,
just you need a voice to take a side.
yeah.
You don't have to be like super, this political stuff where it's crazy, but take a stance, and then you're obviously going to get people that are going to be against that.
Oh, totally.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've never worried as much about that. Obviously, it hurts. It still hurts. You're like, oh my god,
Sure.
am I that? Because I can't think of. I mean, we get them probably. Same for you. You get them regularly, and stuff comes in. I can't remember what the last. Oh, I know what it was. It was. I mean, it was a conservation. We do everything we do has a not everything, but we try to when we do our events, we always have a conservation partner. And we had one up in Alaska because the Chinook stuff that's going on is crazy,
Yeah.
like these collapses and stuff. So we've been covering that on some of the trips, and
Oh,
and
yeah,
I had
yeah,
the
yeah.
salmon state on, and it was like I was just basically listening, like I do. I
Uh,
let people talk, and a listener reached out and was like, "Man, I love your podcast, but you didn't tell both sides of the story." Right? And I'm like, oh, well, I guess there is another side. I'm not sure what that is, and that's what I told
oh,
him. I was like, hey, you tell me what is the other side and who should I get on?
oh, you're a brave man. Yeah, if you get in the salmon steelhead territory, like you got to put some armor on and get ready.
I know. Why is that? Do you think salmon steelhead stuff's different than the permit stuff? Because there's
Oh
probably,
yeah.
it
I,
is.
so I mean, look, I've been living in the Pacific Northwest. I've lived in Bend, Oregon for 15 years. I went to school in Tacoma. So, I've probably spent 20 out of 40 years in the Pacific Northwest, and I am not even close to being able to call myself like a local, or being able to understand this whole weird ecosystem up here. But I did put my time in, trying to be helpful and trying to understand the steelhead thing. And I talked to a lot of smart people. I've interviewed a lot. I've interviewed a lot of people. And I've tried to be helpful, creating content and ways where we can help protect salmon and steelhead. And I continually got slapped by so many different interest groups and different aspects of it
All
that I kind of
right.
just said, I went, you know what? I'm just trying to be helpful, and I clearly can't. So, I kind of bowed out, unfortunately, because that's it's kind of a coward move. But
Right.
I don't
I
know.
hear you.
It's very complicated. It's very steeped in history and tradition. There's so many fragmented interest groups, and I would just stare at these groups of people and say, "Hey," and also it's very common in fishing. Like if you go to a fishing location where there's a lot of fishing guides, you'll have a ton of fishing guides that despise each other, and I usually am kind of the one in the middle because I'll work with a lot of them and I'll say, "Hey, that guy that you don't like is a pretty good dude, and
Yeah.
you guys are pretty similar." And you're both good dudes. I bet you if you guys sat down and had a beer for 30 minutes, you guys would probably be fast friends. Like it's just you've got some weird stuff between you, but if you just like had a conversation, you'd get along great.
That's true.
And I feel like that's the salmon and steelhead thing. Cause I look at those groups and I'm like, you guys you're using so much energy churning and burning and pointing fingers and picking at each other, that it's like watching a bunch of kids in the back of the car fight. Like if you would just take a second and apply that energy to something constructive, you could probably move forward.
You could.
But I'll probably get in trouble for saying that.
It doesn't happen. Partly it's the social media stuff, right? It's this world that we live in where, the more you're negative, the more you get more views, right? Again, back to those polarizing things. The more negative you are, the more money you can make in
That's true.
right? And
that's true.
So that's the crazy thing. You have that whole thing going on too.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is messy, but okay, cool. Well, basically you have, some of these videos. Let's talk about, we're going to start to take it out here. Actually, let's just hop into our conservation kind of segment, Our conservation corner. This one today is presented by Patagonia. They're swift current waders, so we got to give a shout out to Patagonia.
Oh, sweet.
We love Patagonia. I had Yvon Chouinard on. We talked about, just Patagonia, the company, how it came to be and his ethos and it's amazing when you talk to that guy because he's so dedicated to his mission and stuff. But so first off, shout out to Patagonia. We love them. Talk about that. I want to hear about, have you written more about some of the conservation stuff? You talked about a little bit on that episode, The Silent Spotter. Are there other issues is that something you're really thinking about as you're doing these movies?
Yeah. And I want to give since we're doing a Patagonia shout out, I want to give one to Nick Blix at Patagonia. I think he's the number one Patagonia employee. I'm going to go ahead and say it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I've heard his name.
I just saw him a couple of days ago in Denver, and just love that guy. But anyway, and we love Patagonia too.
Yep.
Conservation. Look, I mean, I've been raised in a household where I was told you're gonna be active in conservation and giving back, and a lot of that's going to be in two different minds. You're going to get your hands dirty, and so I'd go to the nature center and clean up cages for the birds of prey and do that stuff, and do physical work and put the time in and put the work in, and then also use your skills that you have and use your brain as you can to help in conservation too. So my whole life I've been in a lot of different projects, and so we've done some very deliberate stuff, and we've been very active in a lot of campaigns. I do a lot more in conservation as it applies to forests because I work in the music industry and I work in guitars and timber. And so I do a lot of work.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work in sustainability and conservation as it applies to timber. But as we know, this world is one big connected thread. So what's good for old growth forests in Southeast Alaska and the Tongass is great for salmon streams and fish. So it all comes around.
That's right.
But we're actively, we try to have an integration and something into everything we do. I think, the way that you bring conservation into media nowadays is really complicated and challenging. I think with Matt, the Hard Way film that we have going.
Oh yeah.
Matt is a steward of the river, and he does a tremendous amount of work. River cleanups, planting trees, all sorts of things that are, he's boots on the ground, getting his hands dirty, and he does a lot of work to keep his ecosystem in the Deschutes River clean. When it came to telling that story with Matt's a very quiet individual, and he doesn't say a ton. And so what we wanted to do with him was show instead of tell. So Matt basically is like, as he's walking along the river, just pauses for a moment, shows some willows, and goes, these are some willows that we planted back in this year, and these willows help protect the bank from, cattle getting in the water and doing this. And I've got shots of Matt, just basically doing what he always does, pulling trash out of the, pulling plastic chairs and trash out of the river and carrying it out. And so him showing, what he does without being asked, without making a big deal, without doing social media posts about it, him just being a steward of the river, I hope is a subtle reminder that, we all have things that we can just do, little things we can do.
That is a good subtle reminder, right? And I caught that in that as well. Yeah, it was just a little clip on the willows. And you could get that sense from Matt too. Yeah, he's quiet. He got, at the start, he talks about getting stabbed. You didn't tell that story much other than that. Do you know that whole story about where he came from and how he became a guide?
Yeah, Matt's story is fascinating. And so in that movie, when we started out with that movie, it was really a movie. It was a love letter to the Deschutes River, and we wanted to show the river over the course of 4 seasons, and how it changes, and just because it's a high desert river, so the change is subtle. The grass goes from bright green to brown, and that's a big change. So it's capturing these little changes. But we needed a really good human character because people relate to people more than water. And so we brought in Matt, and Matt kind of tells his story about being a Native American guide on that section of river. And he didn't really tell us, he didn't want to talk a lot about his backstory until pretty much the very end. But yeah, he basically explains he was brought up in California in a pretty rough environment and was a city kid. Didn't like nature, didn't like Oregon, didn't like the high desert. They tried to send him up here a couple times, didn't like it. Finally, he got in some pretty bad situations back in California, and he got jumped and he got stabbed a whole bunch, and almost didn't make it. And finally, when he was recovering, said, "Okay, I'm going to get out of here." And he went to the high desert where his family lives on the Warm Springs Reservation, and he came up under his grandfather, who was the first native guide on the Deschutes and a very tough individual. And Matt came up the hard way, kind of like chopping wood and driving shuttles, and slowly became a fishing guide and learned to love it. So went from a city kid who hated nature to loving it. And now he's probably the most successful guide, or one of the, not most successful, one of the busiest guides in the state.
Yeah. The cool thing about that is there's not a lot of guides on the Warm Springs, right? I think there's him, and is it Elke is the only, are they the only other operation with the Native American side?
Yeah, there's not many guides up there. And, there's not a tremendous amount of outdoor recreation jobs or opportunities in that area too. So super proud of him, and he's just an amazing individual. And yeah, his story, he didn't really want to go super, super deep into the darker parts of his story, but he kind of gives it to you a little bit, and you learn that he comes from a hard place, and that, he decided to have a healthy, clean track. And now he's got I just got a text from him yesterday. They just welcomed their new daughter.
Oh, wow.
And so he's got a great family, and he can, do all these things with this great resource. So it's a really nice story. I really like it.
That's so cool. Nice. Well, we'll have some links out to that. What is let's just take it out of here on where are you now? Do you have a home? Well, you mentioned Bend. Is that kind of your home, or are you traveling more outside of Oregon and doing more of your production stuff?
We do. Yeah. So based in Bend, Oregon, here in the middle of the state in the high desert. And we do a lot of storytelling. We're working on a big piece, trying to save a big tract of forest in Montana, a piece of old growth forest that's under threat. Working on a big project with the actor Jeff Bridges. And so that documentary hopefully will be done this coming year. But basically just trying to find good, authentic stories that need to be told, and trying to do a good job of honoring everyone's story.
Yeah. I'm interested in the forest. We don't have to go deep on this one, but because obviously it's not too dissimilar to the salmon. You mentioned the connection. There is a total connection in the life cycle of all this. But
sure,
old growth forests were at one time. You can go down to the redwoods and drive through the trees and stuff. But I mean, historically in the Pacific Northwest, that was everywhere.
Yeah.
Now they've been. I don't know if what's left, 1% or there's some small. What is your take on that? The forests, like, do we have a shot here? How do we get to that point where the forests are protected?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really polarizing, and it's a really tough topic to speak about.
Yeah. Do you remember the forest? You might remember this back in the, I think it was the early 90s. Clinton was in office. You had the spotted owl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the spotted owl was used, I think, as a tool to say, hey, save the spotted owl. But really it was about the trees, I think.
Yeah.
Right? And
well, I mean, look, I'll try to keep this as short as I can. I mean, I spent the last 20 years in sustainable, procuring sustainable woods and all these things, and going to pretty much every forest in the world to learn about them. But I think, look, we all need wood. We all need paper. We all need timber.
Yeah, we all need toilet paper, right? That's what the loggers, I think that's what the loggers would tell you. Hey, you wipe your butt too, right?
Yeah. We need toilet paper. We need timber. I love building stuff. Like, we build guitars out of wood. So, I mean,
right.
I love timber, and I am super pro. I mean, I am pro logging. Like, we need to log a lot, and we have a lot of resources, and we can do it. But I think about it like having a garden. You can have a lot of stuff in your garden, and you can have stuff that you can cut down that'll regrow fast, that are going to be really, really great. And then you can have beautiful things in your garden, like apple trees, and these other things that are old that you need to protect. That are heirloom things that belong to us, that belong to Americans, that belong to people in Montana. There are natural resources, there are things, and they're beautiful, and we should treasure that. There's not a lot of them left. And so if we have the ability to keep them, and then also have the ability to get the resources that we need somewhere else, then we should just try to be in the same mind and say, yeah, like, maybe let's keep some of these really nice things around, because we don't have very many of them,
Yeah.
many of them left, on a case by case. And I think what's going to be tricky is that we have a lot of really, really big issues right now with forest fires, and
I know.
fire makes it really complicated. And I grew up again in Colorado, where there was a ton of beetle kill, and I understand the danger and I understand the threat. I live in a place that is probably going to burn down at some point. Like, I'm scared of fire. I don't like it either, but we can't just apply. We really have to look at everything on a case by case basis and be thoughtful about it. Because this old stuff, like, when it's gone, it's gone. And you can do it sustainably. Like, we go to different forests and we buy wood, and we learn from different cultures and people that have been doing it sustainably for way, way longer than we have. And it's like, oh, okay, well, there's a way to do it. So anyway, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I think,
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. I like. Well, let's segue this and take it out here, the guitars, and we'll take it into music, because I love music, and
oh, you do?
I have
Yeah.
a guitar. But I'm not a great guitar player. But what does that look like for guitars? What is first off, just what is that? What you do with the talk about your music background, and then how you choose guitars? Is it one type of wood, or is there tons of guitars made out of different types of wood?
Well, so I work for a company that's been building acoustic guitars for 30 years, and I've been working with them for 15. We decided we wanted to be the first fully sustainable company, and everybody's like, "Oh, you can't do that. That's impossible." And we're like, "Okay, well, here you go. We'll show you." And we did it. And then they said, "Well, you can't do it in Asia if you import guitars, because you can't have sustainability in China, because it's a black hole and you can't track everything." It's too. And so we're like, "Yeah, we can." So we did it. We're like, "Here you go. Here's an example. Other industries, have at it. Be sustainable if you want." Anyway, the point is, if you look at, there's a tremendous amount of wood and different species, and it's no different than fish or animals or mammals or anything. There's variety all over the world. If you want a lot of variety, you want a lot of flavors, you want a lot of different things, then you have to preserve the different types. If you want one or two options, then cut everything down and grow one or two things. An example of that is like mahogany. If you like mahogany, then you're going to have to figure out how to use it sustainably, because it only grows in a very small window from, basically Costa Rica up into the bottom part of Mexico. And it only grows in a very specific region where hurricanes can come through. It's a species dependent on hurricanes to disrupt the canopy for its growth. Like, it has a very small place
Wow.
where it can grow. And if you clear cut all the forest to raise cattle, that species gone. It's gone for good. But you can go to a lot of places where communities are managing their forests, so they have counted every single tree. They know the age of them. They know how many they have, and they know how to replant. And they're like, we can sustainably keep these forever if we just pay attention. So there's ways to do things if you really want to do it, or you can cut it all down and, just like I said, you can just have a couple species.
Have a monoculture. What's the most famous, the Stratocaster, right? Like some of those, I guess that's more electric guitars, but
Yeah.
what's the most common wood that a acoustic guitar is made out of?
So to keep it really simple, guitars have to be made out of two different types of wood. They need to be made out of a hardwood, which is on the back and sides, and they need a softer wood on the top that's going to move and create all the sound energy inside of the body of the guitar. And so, traditionally speaking, the back and side woods were things like rosewood. Brazilian rosewood would probably be the most iconic, or a mahogany. And so those two woods are probably the most iconic. Rosewood is found all over the world. It's a Dalbergia, but iterations of it are found all over the world. The Brazilian is the most famous because it was, they basically said, you couldn't use it when they were trying to preserve the rainforest. And so it is now considered under the law, it is seen as the same as like African elephant ivory in terms of owning it and having it. Like you need to have paperwork, and it is highly regulated. But there's a lot of other things that can sound similar to it. But I think the problem is like there's a lot of different types of woods and a lot of trees. But again, as you start to whittle them down and they start to disappear, it's like cooking. You start to lose your different flavors, and eventually you're going to be left with just a couple spices.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's a little on the guitars. That's great. Well, let's start. We always love to get back to music and movies and kind of keep this going here. What is what's your genre? What type of music do you like? Do you play? Are you a big guitar player?
I shouldn't say I'm a big guitar player. I've been playing for 20 years, and I should be a lot better. But I sure love it. I listen to a lot of different stuff, but I've been listening to, I really dig this kid Marcus King. Billy Strings. I've been listening to a lot of that. Kind of just depends on, but I'll also listen to a lot of old school hip hop. Listen to all different types of genres. But how about you?
Yeah, kind of the same. I mean, I love the string band. I love the bluegrass. I love old country. Kind of mixing hip hop, of course. I love Rick Rubin. I was just like, again, I'm a podcasting freak, right? So Rick Rubin's, they've got that podcast where they go into back in the history. But I think his story is so cool that he can take, sex, what was it, the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
And then he goes in and he takes Johnny Cash from almost at the end of his road, and he produces five of the greatest albums ever. Johnny Cash. And
oh yeah,
it's so good. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it. So I feel like Rick Rubin. That's what I love about music. It's powerful, right?
Yeah.
So I'm all over the place. I always have a struggle to pick one, but yeah, that's good. So we'll put some Marcus King. I don't know Marcus, so we'll put that in the show notes.
Oh, check out Marcus King. Google Marcus King and Billy Strings. They get together in Nashville a bunch, and they go to the super high end. There's a high end music store with all this super old expensive stuff, and they go in there and they basically just film them jamming out together. And like,
yeah,
if people, you always hear people be like, "Oh yeah, well, music's dead," or like, guitar playing's dead, or like the greatest music was back then, like. Go listen to Billy Strings and Marcus King jam for a little bit and tell me what you think.
Right. Good. Okay. We'll leave the show here on that, and we'll have some people out there listen to that. So this is good.
All right.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll send everybody out to offthegridstudios.com. They can check in with you there and check out your stuff. And yeah, man, appreciate all your time. And I'm excited because I've got some more movies to watch of your history, and I'll be keeping up with you. And thanks again for all your time.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Quick call to action for you today. If you're interested, check in with RA at offthegridstudios.com and let them know you heard this podcast, and you can check in on some of those movies. We didn't even get into all of them. He mentioned he's got over 30, and so there's a bunch of content there. If you're interested, let me know if you get a chance to check in with RA. Also, we have our own YouTube channel going, and hopefully we'll be connecting a little bit more with RA here. We have some webinars going on that are on YouTube. You can check in with Bruce Richards. This was completed fly casting. If you want fly casting instruction from one of the best, it's out there right now. You can check it out on YouTube. Bruce Richards webinar, it's there now. We have the Missouri trip going strong right now. If you're interested in fishing the Missouri, if you ever thought about this in Montana, one of the great western rivers, we're heading there. You can go to wetflyswing.com/Missouri right now, and that'll get you to a page. You can enter your name and email, and I'll follow up with you on details, and I'll let you know what we have for availability. This is going to be a small group. We're going to a small lodge, a very family-oriented, really cool lodge. This is Craig DeMark. We have an episode with him on. You can check in with that. Craig DeMark on DeMark Lodge. That's going to be on this year. All right, I'm out of here. Big day today. Hope you are having a good one. I hope you're having a big day yourself. And you have a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, wherever in the world you are. And we'll talk to you on the next one.